Black-Robed Priest and the Algonquins Pere Marquette by Jason Robbins. You fool, why did you let the black robe have your gun? The Indian who spoke had coloured stripes on his face and hands. He had them on his shaved head and on his body too, but heavy furs hid them. He was an Algonquin Indian. And a medicine man. He was supposed to cure the sick by magic. The other Indian wore the red feather of a warrior chief, both of them trying to get warm by the icy weather. Stood close to a campfire on the border between Canada and what is now the United States. At the time, in the year 1666, it was only a group of small British colonies along the Atlantic coast. The camp was freezing cold, the snow had stopped, and it lay hard-packed on the ground. Icicles hung from the trees and from the ridge poles of the tents. Other Indians sat huddled around a great fire, the only bright thing on that frozen spot. They hardly lifted their faces to listen to the medicine man. All that day and all the day before, they had had nothing to eat. They were sick and weary with hunger. The men sat close to the fire, the women and children in a ring behind them. Again, the medicine man asked the chief, "Why do you let the black robe have your gun?" The chief looked back at him with a troubled face. "Black Robe has more than my gun. He has my son too. The man you call Black Robe is Pere Marquette, a French priest. His Manitou is more powerful than yours." A Manitou is a word for an Algonquin Indians used for the Great Spirit of God, or God. "When I was sick," the chief went on to the medicine man, "you made all your magic sounds, you made them as loud as you could, but your Manitou did not listen, and I did not get better. The Black Robe came, he talked to his Manitou in a low voice. His Manitou heard, and I came out of my sickness and was well." The truth was that Pere Marquette was not only a priest, but a doctor and a surgeon too. "We Algonquins have been the enemies of the French people," the chief continued. "Black Robe could have killed me." The Indian medicine man hated all white men, but especially he hated Pere Marquette, the French Jesuit priest. He knew that if the Indians turned to the white man's Manitou, his own power would be gone forever. He growled, "Only a coward saves the life of an enemy. He will put a curse on your son. You will see." But the chief had turned away and was facing the woods. The pines stood straight and tall, their tops snow-capped. The chief put out his arm and pointed to an aisle between the trees. "Look," he said, "here comes Black Robe Pere Marquette through the forest aisles." A tall man was striding toward them. From head to foot, his long black robe was caked with snow and ice. In his arms he carried a snowy bundle. "There, I told you," said the medicine man to the chief. "Your son is sick. The priest has to carry him." But suddenly the bundle began to wriggle, and in a moment a small Indian boy, also snowy white from head to foot, jumped out from the priest's arms and came running toward the chief, letting out a full-grown war whoop as he came. "It is my son, my little big mouth," exclaimed the chief happily. "See, he is not sick at all." "Oh, father," shouted the boy, running toward the chief, "we have killed a big moose. There is meat." The boy poured out the words in excitement. "My arrow, Black Robe's gun." The boy's breath gave out. The medicine man hated to give up. Advanced angrily towards Pere Marquette. "How could you find a moose when we could it not?" he yelled. Some of the campers crowded around the priest. They paid no attention to the medicine man. All they wanted was to bring the moose into the camp. Pere Marquette pointed back and said, "We left the moose because the boy's short legs could not keep up with mine." The chief then repeated the medicine man's question. but in a quiet voice. How is it, Pere Marquette, that you were able to find meat when skilled Indian hunters who looked for 2 days could find none? Pere Marquette raised his eyes to heaven. It is with the help of God, he answered. His Manitou, murmured one of the Indians with respect. Pere Marquette looked into the eyes of the chief. It was the voice of God that told you to let your son go with me too. He went on, without him I would not have had that moose. He is the one who found the way. Before the priest could say more, a group of men came out of the woods, dragging the moose. The man shouted with joy there would be enough meat for days. Everything else was forgotten as some of the Indians cut the great animal apart and threw the pieces of the squaws to cook, while others cleared away the flaming logs, leaving only the glowing embers. The squaws filled great iron pots with snow, and when the snow bubbled and boiled over the hot ashes, they threw in the hunks of moose. The children put small pieces on sticks and held them to the fire. The men took no part in this. Even a starving Indian would not do the squaw's work of cook. The medicine man made a last effort to defeat the priest. This is evil meat, he groaned. It will poison you. But the good smell of the roasting meat was too much even for him. Soon he was gobbling down great hunks with all the others. Pere Marquette ate too, slowly though, and not much, and not until he had lifted his crucifix. Now coated with ice, and thanked the Lord for his guidance and help. Meat from another hungry time. But he knew they wouldn't do it. He managed to put away a little for himself and the boy. At last, when their first hunger was satisfied, the braves asked the priest once more how he had found the moose. The boy was bursting to tell the story, but he kept silent, waiting for his father's permission. Pere Marquette said quietly to the chief, "Let the boy tell you." The little big mouth stepped into the ring of the braves. It was a strange sight in an Indian camp to see grown men listening to a boy. "We walked a long way," said Little Big Mouth. "We listened for the sound of a snapped twig, for the call of a bird, but we heard nothing. I was glad to be with Pere Marquette, because I would have been terribly lonely in all that silence. Everything we looked for, berries or nuts, there was nothing, not even one." The boy pointed to his left. Along one side there was deep underbush. We thought there might be game there, but we could not go into it without noise. That would scare the birds and the deer. At last I caught sight of a little tunnel in the thicket. I asked Black Robe if I could crawl into that tunnel. It was much too low for a grown man, but I could manage to get through. I crept in very slowly. A little at a time, I found a few nuts, but I found much more. When I got to the end of the little tunnel, I could see through the branches into a hollow. Down in it stood the moose. There was no such snow there. I fitted an arrow into my bow, and the arrow flew through, but I did not kill him. The buck leapt out of the thicket right into the open. Black Robe saw him and fired his gun. The white man's Manitou made that tunnel. The white man's Manitou sent me with Pere Marquette. Pere Marquette patted Little Big Mouth on the head. "Well done, my boy," he said. All this talk in the Indian camp was in the Algonquin language. Only a short time before Pere Marquette had come to Canada from France. He did not know a word of any Indian language. Most of the French settlers spoke Iroquois, because the Iroquois were their friends. But Pere Marquette felt that he must go to the Algonquins, who were his enemy, and make them friends. The first thing he did was to learn the Algonquins language. The region of North America, then ruled by the French, to which Pere Marquette came, was full of lakes and rivers. The mighty St. Lawrence River flowed out to the sea. The Great Lakes spread like giant fingers across the land. Travelling on these waterways was much quieter than going through forests on land. So the French learned from the Indians how to make canoes and how to paddle them. These canoes were harder to handle than a modern canoe. Their ribs were made of cedar covered with birch bark. A hasty movement, and there was a hole in the thin birch bark. The paddles had to move in a rhythm like the oars of a modern racing shell. In these eggshell boats, men fought rapids and wind-swept eddies in the stormy distances of the Great Lakes. The French Canadians became much better boatmen than the Indians who taught them. They were small, rough, strong men. They were called voyageurs, a French word that meant travellers. At first the voyageurs smiled as they watched Pere Marquette trying to keep his balance in their canoes, trying to learn how to handle a paddle. Still, when they came to a rough place, they carried him on their shoulders. But Pere Marquette was also a strong man, and soon he was as good as they were at the paddles of the canoe. The voyageurs amused themselves by shooting with bows and arrows, but their real weapons, which came from France, were heavy, clumsy guns called blunderbusses. You couldn't be aimed as well as a modern gun, but they spattered shot over a wider space. They took a long time to load. The voyageurs were skillful with these blunderbusses. Pere Marquette was a good shot, and it was with one of these that he had shot the moose from the Indian camp. So Pere Marquette learned to live in the wilderness. He learned the languages of many Indian tribes, brought many of them into his church. But he had long had a secret dream. He was a priest and a surgeon, but he was also an explorer. He longed to explore more deeply into the American continent. Although the first French explorers had come to America 100 years before, Marquette, there were still not many in Marquette's time. There were many more British, and there was keen rivalry among the settlers of both nations from the American continent, but they all thought the continent was just a narrow strip of land, and that if they went just a little way west, they would reach the Pacific Ocean. Neither the French nor the British had any idea of the vast width of North America. Many times rumours had come to Pere Marquette that there was a mightier river even than the St. Lawrence. Some said it was to the west, and some said it was to the south. He longed to explore, but he felt his first duty was to the church, so he worked and waited patiently. At last one day, as he stood on the shore of Lake Huron, he watched a large canoe coming in fast. As it came closer, he saw that it had a crew of voyageurs, and he saw that the man in command was his dear, loved friend, Louis Joliet. Joliet was neither a noble nor a priest. He was the son of a poor wagon maker, but he turned out to be one of the greatest explorers in history. Now he jumped out of the boat, a gay smile on his daredevil face. His deerskin clothes dyed in bright colours, his fur hat on the side of his head. No one had gone farther or knew more of the country than Joliet, and he brought wonderful news from the government in Quebec. Pere Marquette and he were to be allowed to explore the unknown country. Some of the Indians had pretty good idea of where the great river lay, but they were afraid of it with a deep superstition fear. They said that there were demons and evil forces in that river, which swallowed whole boatfuls of men. And they said that the shores were lined with fierce fighting tribes. For this reason, the two French explorers wanted no Indians in their crew. But that was all right, since no Indians wanted to go. Of course, neither Marquette nor Joliet believed their stories about demons, but they thought it likely that the tribes were savage. They built themselves 2 large canoes with one of them in command of each. Their crews were voyageurs. The journey was long and hard. There were rivers and lakes, and in between portages, where they had to carry the canoes on their shoulders, walking single file, and wherever they stopped, there was word of the mighty river farther on. And at last they saw the broad sweep of the Mississippi, the longest river on the American continent. Where their canoes swept into it, the river was a mile wide, and Louis Joliet gave a wild Indian war whoop as the canoe breasted the mighty waters. All along there were Indians, but not one fought the explorers. High up on the river they had met the tribe of the Illinois. The Illinois were friendly and smoked the calumet, the pipe of peace, which the explorers, and after that, when the canoes approached a new shore off the river, Marquette stood up and held the calumet high, with his hands widespread to show he came in peace. This was a wonderful thing about Pere Marquette. At a time and in a land where white men and Indians fought so much, he never fought Indians at all. He was the way of peace. Long they journeyed down the river. At first they thought it might be empty into the Pacific or the Atlantic, but they found that it emptied into the Gulf of Mexico. This great river, then the Mississippi, was a highway from Canada to the Gulf, a swift way to travel from north to south, a swift way to ship furs and lumber and, later on, iron ore and grain. It became the great highway for the entire United States later on and helped to make it rich and powerful. On the way back from his great journey, Pere Marquette fell sick. He was only 38 years old when he died, and in the year 1675 he died on a lonely prairie on the east shore of Lake Michigan. Nothing was there then, not even a fort. Today a city, Ludington, stands there. Marquette had been in America for only 9 years, but in those 9 years he had crowded more adventure than most men do in a long lifetime. Louis Joliet tended him to the last and went on sadly and alone. Today, if you should go to the states of Wisconsin or Michigan, you would find many monuments to Pere Marquette and Joliet. These states now cover much of the land over which the two great Frenchmen travelled. There are villages and cities named for Marquette, and in Milwaukee there is a university bearing his name. In Chicago there are plaques honouring Joliet, and in Illinois, city of Joliet is named for him. And in Illinois, the city of Joliet is named for him. Strangers in a strange land. Marquette and Joliet opened a path for the great countries that came after them. The history of Canada followed the lakes and rivers they explored. A great part of the history of the United States marched along the Mississippi